Welcome back to the Kaplan Way for Instruction. My name is Eli Schwartz from the Learning Science team. I'm here to lead you through Part 2, Understanding the Definition of the Terms in the Kaplan Way Checklist. Our objective for this next part of the training is to enable you to define the Kaplan Way's remaining 10 categories. Once you fully understand the definitions, you'll develop a whole range of best practices and principles that you can apply to your work, whether that's related to the user experience or involved in content development. We'll first take a look back at Part 1's salient points and 2 overarching categories, before covering the remaining 10 categories in 2 general groups. Conveniently, 5 of them are central to the student experience and are often items that we receive comments on directly through student feedback. The remaining 5, the learner might not be as aware of, but the content developer must be if the lessons are to follow the Kaplan Way for highest impact and effective instruction. The 2 key components to keep in mind about learning are that it involves changing someone's actions or decisions, and in doing so, it takes that person from a novice to, accessibly, more of an expert. Last time, we went through 2 of the 12 broad categories, and we didn't linger long on the trios of subcategories, nor will we in this lesson, besides pointing to a few standouts. If you want to get deeper into this stuff, we can let you know how to do so. The ratings are simply 1 or 0, depending on whether a trait appears at least 50% of the time or not, respectively. NA is very rare, but a possible rating. For instance, if a course is text only, the Category 6, Multimedia, would surely earn an NA. Everything in the course hinges on strong objectives and appropriate assessment. Objectives are action-oriented, so they will describe the student behavior that is to be changed and made more expert. And assessment, of course, gauges that expertise with a focused test. Now, here are the 5 categories out of the 12 that comprise the checklist that are central to the user experience, or the manner in which the learner interacts with a Kaplan program. Our learning objective today is that you can define each, and hopefully call to mind good examples of their utilization, but some of these definitions might be more self-evident than others. Let's explore what each means in the context of the Kaplan Way, focusing on clean, straightforward definitions. The usability category really boils down to this. How easy is it for the student to get around? We want to avoid inconsistent styles, difficulty in navigation, any confusion. We certainly aren't going to go into every subcategory today, but I call your attention to an item as simple as 11.2. It's deemed advisable for the learner to instantly see how far she's gone and how far she has left to go. And even a progress bar like this training video has could satisfy that component easily. Organization refers to the overall governing logic, or the order in which topics are presented to the student. A product, like a lesson or a video, shouldn't be just a hodgepodge of topics and learning objectives arbitrarily tossed together to check them off of a list. The content and objectives have to be in sync. The prerequisites must be introduced before more difficult topics. Note that item 10.3 also asks that the teacher or lesson alternate between presenting information about a skill and letting students practice that skill, creating a more efficient learning leading up to performing an assessment. Personalization does not mean that the student has free rein to wander around the course and do what they like. It means that the course itself analyzes the student and directs them to do or not do certain things based on their performance. Content, in other words, should be tailored to the learner based on what they already know. Different learners' paths can and should themselves be different. A novice follows a set path through all or the majority of content, while someone more expert earns a more streamlined path. Personalization of a course this way can be labor-intensive and employ complex technology, but it's worth consciously working toward. The operative phrase for multimedia is complementary use. That is, complementary multimedia, text, images, sound, videos, should work comfortably together. Those three elements shouldn't clash or force the learner to decide what's most important to look at. In addition, these items shouldn't be redundant. For example, having audio of a teacher reading verbatim on screen may be out of sync with the learner's own reading pace. Rather, they should work together to allow the learner to process and evaluate each smoothly. And motivation has to do with two things: convincing the students to be fired up so they get started, and making sure there's enough fire to keep them going when things get tough. While those with a fixed mindset might think that there's a set limit to learning and feel low motivation, convincing them to keep a growth mindset where increased effort pays off with improvement is often associated with general improved motivation. And since we are by default experts, it can be hard to recall which topics are truly harder than others. For 9.1's message, fessing up about the difficult concepts actually sets proper expectations that directly impact motivation. A phrase you might hear in a great classroom is, "Though this topic is difficult, you can still attack it systematically." Additionally, even the best instruction often has to fight the perception that success somehow hinges on intelligence or gender or ethnicity or even past performance on similar tests. We always tell students that their performance hinges on just two things: their effort and attitude. A great teacher might remind her class, "Everyone really pushed themselves today and stayed positive, and I can see that already making a difference across the board, no matter what level you started at." Within the user experience, we've covered 5 categories. A usable course is one that's easy to get around and that gives you visual cues as to how far you've come. An organized course presents topics in logical order and gives students spaced chances to try their hand at the skills. A personalized course gives different assignments and feedback to the expert than to the novice. Effective use of multimedia reduces redundancy and complexity. We should be able to watch and listen and read with ease and without confusion. A motivating course always tells the students they can do it, or at least can do it better, if they invest the right effort. It promotes a growth mindset over a fixed mindset. The final 5 categories are of greatest interest to designers of courses, meetings, videos, even PowerPoint shows. Obviously, all of them have an impact on how the students are taught, but it's the course developers who have to be most cognizant of these criteria in their work. The overview both introduces and comments. At the start of a course or lesson, students want and deserve a preview of what's coming, but they also want the lesson's goals clarified. Moreover, they need to know the worth of what they're about to learn. It's not sufficient to just present an agenda and move on. Falling under the category of information would be things like a teacher's lecture, handouts, or background reading. In other words, it's the stuff the student needs as background in order to have a disciplined approach to learning challenges. Notably, 5.1 and 5.3 insist on alignment with both the course's learning objectives and overviews. And further, 5.2 is a critical yet often ignored element. While it's tempting to add real-world color and personal anecdotes, particularly for live teachers, it's imperative that we banish nice-to-know information from the classroom or video as much as possible. If the goal is to make a student more capable at a specific thing, anything not needed for that thing can and should be postponed, or added only briefly, or avoided altogether. Need to know must prevail. By examples, we're talking about what the teacher presents to directly illustrate the skills being taught, aka worked examples. If a math teacher is teaching factoring, for instance, she'll need to put something about factoring up on the board, of course. She wouldn't just use any old math or set of equations that she fancies. That's what Category 4 is getting at. The examples have to be ones that directly relate to and illustrate the skills being taught. Earlier, we said that a good lesson alternates between the teacher presenting and the student doing. Practice allows the student, or teacher or tutor, to figure out what the student is doing wrong and then have the feedback to correct any errors before a final assessment or perform component. And finally, integration is asking the question, is the student truly absorbing the material? A course will allow students to think deeply into what they've learned and possibly go further beyond it. That's how we know they've truly absorbed what's being taught. Discussions allow students to apply their knowledge in other contexts, and connections should be made among lessons or lectures and across quizzes or homework. For the categories that directly relate to content development, context and value are the domain of the overview, in which the teacher or course clarifies what's going to be learned and why that's important. We want to ensure that a course's information is need to know only. That which is nice to know blurs the focus. An illustration of a task is an example, and this argues for it being well chosen, relevant, and on point for the tasks being taught. In practice segments of any lesson, the student gets a chance to try the new skills. This lets them always be monitored so that the course and teacher can provide encouraging corrective feedback to facilitate improvement. A course with strong integration will not just enable, but encourage students to apply what they've learned to broader and different contexts. We hope the definitions are now clear and that you have a fuller appreciation of how all 12 of the Kaplan-Way checklist categories work together, whether overarching as we saw in Part 1, or specific to UX, or specific to content development, as we've learned in this session. In Part 3 of these trainings, we'll look at examples of how these categories can be successfully and creatively applied. See you then.